I was engaged for 30 years in obtaining a referendum for the citizens of Sandy Springs as to whether they wanted a city. And they voted 94% that they wanted the city. So after being so invested in trying to obtain the city, it only seemed natural for me to then say I would like to serve as mayor. And I was elected with over 80%. I think the achievement was mainly starting a city from scratch and involving the public. And I think the citizens of Sandy Springs have a very close feeling to their city. They love the fact that they are part of a city. They are looking forward to a town center where they can meet and see each other and go to events together and do all the things that civic pride entail. I do think the one thing that stands out from our first 8 years is the amount of citizen involvement. Meetings bring out lots of people. They want to participate. People really want to participate in their government, and we've made that possible for them and given them a venue that they can be part of the decision process.
Well, I have to say, I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. My family's from South Georgia, so I'm not someone who tolerates a lot of BS and nonsense. When I see something wrong, I say something about it. When I see people being wronged, especially our nation's veterans, I see it as my duty as a citizen of this country to speak out, to say something. I mean, we're talking about cases where 47,000 vets died between 1998 and 2012 before VA ever processed the healthcare application. We know that as much as 91,700 vets whose applications have been in a pending status most likely could have been processed with the information that already is on file. There is a business rule that's being discussed with VA leadership that most likely will be approved by Secretary McDonald, which will allow them to do a mass deletion of almost 800,000 pending healthcare applications simply because VA never bothered to process it. You know, it sounds corny, you just feel better when you do the right thing. When I was working here and being silent, I gained 50 pounds. I had hypertension. It was so bad my doctor had to take me out of work. And I finally said, you know, Scott, you can't keep on like this. You need to say something. You know it's wrong. My job was to make management look good, essentially. And I don't think they really need me to do that anymore. I think, you know, as my father said before he passed, you're here for a purpose. And once your purpose is served, you moved on. And I think that's probably my situation at VA. You know, this was my purpose for coming here. My purpose is almost served. And at that point, I'll just be moving on.
Yes, after 20 years of making the world safe for insurance companies, I was ready to do something a little bit different. And I wanted to go back to public interest work. I saw the position for the director of ethics was open, and the position just fascinated me. So the shock and awe of actually of them coming in and suddenly saying, we're cutting your salary by 30% was compounded by the fact that I personally was having a very bad time. My mother was very ill, and she had just been diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. Knowing that they were being disingenuous by telling me that if they cut my salary by 30% and fired my deputy as the only lawyers on staff, that that would somehow resolve issues for the ethics commission, because I knew it wasn't true. And I knew that we had just tried to issue subpoenas to really research and get into the governor's complaints. And like you said, we did not do it for the money. I realize people think we got a lot of money from that lawsuit, but when you parse it all out and pay taxes and everything else, I barely made my back pay. He decided to take a job in Nashville because that was my best opportunity. My husband travels back and forth every week between Atlanta and Nashville. So that's 8 hours of commuting, and 4 nights a week he does not spend with his children. I would take that job back in a heartbeat. I loved that job. I think I was successful at it. Um, I learned a few lessons, obviously.
Well, I thought it'd be a great way to use my skill set and in a different context and also make a difference. Um, this kind of work is important because it's important to hold people with a lot of responsibility accountable. And it's important for the public to know who their elected officials are. So a lot of what I was doing was working through the backlog of cases, running the investigations and trying to figure out if there was anything to the complaints, and if so, how it worked, and if so, what the appropriate outcome should be, then negotiating either settlement or taking them to hearings. And she told me that they eliminated my job and that they cut her salary and that she was going to fight it. And I mean, I knew they didn't have the stones to go forward with the investigation. I knew that, but I didn't think that they'd have the unmitigated gall to fire me for doing an investigation, for doing my job. I just didn't think they were that blatantly chicken. I thought they would have either told us to drop it or, come up with some other way to kind of push it. I've never lost a job before. I've never even gotten I'm an overachiever. I've never even gotten a B when I showed up and tried. And the idea of getting fired for doing my job, I couldn't get my head around it. Every time anybody tried to call and get a reference or anything like that, people refused to talk to them and acted like I had the plague. And because I'm a Republican, this whole thing really burned a lot of my contacts. I had a terrible time getting a job. I've gone over it a million times in my head, and the only thing I think I would have done differently is never take the job in the first place. Wow. But beyond that, I mean, I'd do it again. I did the right thing. I did my job. So I just really appreciate that you guys get it, that you guys understand it, and thank you.
Activism has been in my blood since birth, as my mom said. Being an actual litigant in the Brown versus Board of Education, she was the mother that was used in that case with her mentor, the late Charles Scott. So activism goes a long way in my family. So we try to reinforce a certain amount of empowerment, because if you don't do that, you can't even move forward with holding elected officials accountable. But the second thing we do is we follow that dollar. When you follow that dollar, if you have a problem and you follow that dollar, I can guarantee you're going to figure out what's wrong and who's doing wrong. We had over $5 million, about approximately $5 million allocated to the trust fund to close a bankrupt landfill. Then we did not agree with them placing cell towers on school grounds. So we once again built a coalition and put a referendum on the ballot, in which we had a majority of the vote, over 60%, say no, we do not want cell towers on school grounds. Here recently, DeKalb County has been involved in a number of corruption cases, indictments that really have brought a cloud over us. So we built again another coalition and wrote 3 ethics complaints, and I'm proud to announce that of the 3 ethics complaints, we had 2 to result in the removal of 1 elected official and 2 government staff members that had engaged in criminal corruption. So that's the power of government, when you hold people accountable.
What motivates me is the fact it's about people and not politics. And a lot of people wonder why I do what I do. And the reason I do what I do is you got a lot of people that won't stand up and speak out. They're loading people up with debt through authorities. Authorities are out of control. Commissioners are basically out of control because they back the authorities and back the bonds. The taxpayers don't have a choice. They're getting loaded up with debt. They're raising the millage rate when counties like Paulding and Douglas both are in the high rankings in foreclosures, and you're raising taxes on people that's already losing their houses. So I felt it upon myself to start moving forward to let people know what is actually going on behind their backs. What we're doing, we do a lot of open records requests. We get documents. We get copies of all the financials. We look into what they're doing. We look into the deals they're doing. And we try to bring an education to the people to look at what they're doing. Look at these bonds they're doing. They're spending $7 million to build a film studio. Do we really need a film studio in Paulding County? You know, we don't have but a couple of motels for somebody to come stay in, so is the movie studio people going to come to Paulding? No, they go into Atlanta and other places. Please, people, get involved. Wake up and look at what's going on before you in your county and city, and look at what's really happening and start holding people accountable. Make them be accountable for what they tell you they're going to do.
I go to public meetings of public interest with my video camera and I film them and I post my Nydia's video on YouTube, and then I link to them on my blog and I post it on Facebook and on Twitter. Well, the candidates themselves asked everyone to spread their message, to go and speak to their friends and their neighbors at church and at school and at work, and let them know about this election and let them know what our platform is. And so what better way to do that than in their own words, with a video.
First of all, a little house cleaning. Chief Tatum, if you would, remove the camera from the auditorium. We don't allow filming inside of the city hall in, unless it's for civic reasons. So if you would, remove the camera.
You have to move outside.
That's the reason we don't have Comcast up here on the wall. We don't allow that in.
Respectfully, Mayor, Georgia
It's not a
Sunshine Law.
discussion. Could I have the camera removed, please?
No, sir. Georgia law, I'm exercising my right as a citizen to record this meeting. Sir, this is an open and public meeting.
Anybody like to guess which private sector has lost jobs over the last 3 months? That's not private sector. You pretty much answered it. It has not been any private sector job loss. The job loss comes from 45,000 jobs lost.
What is your name? What is your name? Sir, what is your name? What is your name, sir? Let me get my purse. I need to show you my ID anyway. Sir, I need to show you need to identify yourself.
I've been real nice. Now you're going to jail for resisting arrest.
Well, I am sorry that people are treating you this way. This is wrong. It is wrong.
You've been asked to stop.
I spoke with several candidates and they didn't mind. I spoke with the owner. I spoke with Kathy Burtz. This was a public event posted on Facebook by Governor Deal. This was a public event posted on Facebook by Governor Deal.
Hey, Sonny Bird.
Ow! That hurts. You're hurting me.
Stop.
You're hurting me.
Stop.
You are really hurting me.
Stop.
I think these 3 camera attacks in the last 2.5 years have been political bullying against an individual just trying to provide the public with knowledge about what their public officials are doing. And I feel it's intimidation, it's threatening, it's physically has been very painful. I was assaulted, I had bruises for 2 weeks, I couldn't eat properly, I couldn't sleep properly. I cried every day for a fortnight after that attack in a pumpkin farm, where I felt completely safe with the governor and his wife present.
I think I knew what it felt like for a moment to be Atlas,
to just have the weight of the world on you and having to make a decision in that type of circumstance. It was tough. We speak about a public-private partnership in the spirit of cooperation. I want to be that partner. Under these conditions, I can't be that partner. Not without adequate time to make sure that I am diligently protecting the best interest of the county. I cannot do it within 7 days, even with a legal background. I believe this could have been a win-win for so many more people than what it will be today if we only took more time to get that win. It frightens me, to be honest, the number of threats I've received. If you want a 5-0 vote, you could have gotten it. It could have been easy. But I will not ever be bullied into sacrificing my commitment to the people who put me in this position. Never. When I ran for office, my platform was to move Cobb County forward by engaging Cobb County's best asset, its people. That was my platform. But in business, that faith is summed up in a contract. And I just feel like with my analysis of the contract, I haven't seen any economic analysis yet to date. With so many questions, and I'm looking at the contract and still having questions, I cannot, I cannot with good conscience vote for the MOU. But I do support the Braves being here in Cobb County.
Thank you, Commissioner.
When I spoke, it was like you can hear a pin drop. So I didn't know if I had offended everyone or had just hit a nerve with everyone. But it was very difficult to gain the pulse of the room. I just hope we can play ball in 2017.
There's a larger problem than just the payouts itself. The first fundamental problem is for an administration to feel that they can violate clear prohibitions and boundaries in the code without council having any knowledge. But for someone blowing the whistle, we would have not known about this. And for them to think they have the authority to do it, even without council input, knowledge, or approval, is the bigger issue. However, the payout issue, I have said, I believe, violates the code, were illegal. The people who receive them should repay the money. Because if they don't, you have other similarly situated employees who have not gotten the same benefit. It's unfair. We have the executive branch and the legislative branch, and ours is to set policy, which they should follow. And two is for us to have oversight to make sure that those policies are being meted out. So I'm not meddling and I'm not doing anything that I shouldn't be doing. As a council member, this is what you really elect me to do. The city of Atlanta, I also found, was rated third from the bottom of a group that did studies on transparency across the country. And who's below us? The city of Detroit. I am appealing to the public to join me in this effort because it's their money. And I think if they don't listen to anyone else, they certainly listen to people who go to the ballot box.
You don't go to many events, particularly now in DeKalb, where people don't ask you, how are you doing? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do to help? Well, I wish that, you didn't have to serve in these circumstances. In America today, I think that we have people wanting to sort of stipulate the way that they think things ought to be, rather than perhaps the way that they are. And so as you start to construct your own lens on the world, well, then you can start to put people in a little bit of a funhouse mirror. Oh, that ethics board, they're political, so we ought not give them any money. because they're political. They'll come after me or something like that. Or, well, those auditors, those folks are interfering with our efficiency. So we don't want those auditors digging through all of our files and telling us how to do our business. Ultimately, getting elected to office has a set of skills that don't have anything to do with the skills that you need in order to be a good public servant. And unfortunately, as we continue to abandon politics to politicians, we have people whose primary skill is spinning as opposed to actually analyzing and performing on behalf of their constituents.
Councilman Bond?
No. Wait a minute.
Your family reunion was at the same time as your touring DC.
I would say it is a coincidence.
Campaign disclosure. Judge, can we have a word with you?
They're literally down the hallway discussing whether or not they can kick us out of here.
My attorney will contact you.
Connect with the 11 Alive investigators now by email or phone.
Someone once said to me, "You're always chasing down politicians. You must hate government." And I said, "No, I love government. That's why I like to do this, because government's supposed to work for you, and it's supposed to help people's lives and improve people's lives. And so being a watchdog is such an honor, and it's exciting." Well, like every state I've worked in, Georgia's provided a wealth of politicians that are misusing taxpayer dollars, which is, the most common thing I've found. But also cover-ups and just not being honest, not being transparent. I mean, something as simple as filing campaign disclosure forms, that's a transparency issue. It's not something you can blow off. It's meant to show people where you're getting your money, how you're spending your money, and when you don't do it, you're basically lying. So my philosophy is that the pursuit of truth should be my daily agenda, that despite any obstacles or obstructions to that, my job at the end of the day is to reveal something that somebody doesn't want to be seen. And that makes democracy better, that makes government better, and that makes our lives better. It's vital.
It's really the highest form of reporting you can do. It's one thing to do, daily stories and be part of the daily grind and churn out things that are sort of quick hits, but there's really nothing that compares to being able to really dig in and really get the full story as much as you possibly can. Just going through Elaine Boyer's records in her office one day, I could see that she'd been making numerous reimbursements to her P card. And that was sort of a red flag. Why are you reimbursing it? I could see maybe once, but over and over and over, that's kind of a pattern of using it for personal expenses. And that's what set it off. One thing led to another. She started reimbursing even more charges as I was asking questions about them, so we knew this was sort of an ongoing scheme. And that story was what set off the chain of events that led to her eventually pleading guilty in federal court, because she basically said in her guilty plea this was a kickback scheme. And that's what it takes. You have to stay on it. You have to keep going and keep publishing stories, keep digging, and keep trying to get to the truth. And that's what we eventually did.
Peach Pundit's about open dialogue of Georgia politics. We do state and local politics. We try to avoid national media simply because then it reverts to talking points. And what we've tried to do is find people from different perspectives that actually have some sort of knowledge of a little bit of the inside workings, but can report from state and local levels and again, really just bring what's going on to the people at state and local levels that affect them, frankly, so much more than what Washington often does. There's a lot of things that are just flat out ridiculous in what we do. And so, we laugh along with people. We try not to laugh at them as much, but at the same point, while it's a very serious topic often that we're talking about, if you throw a little bit of humor in it, it reminds us that everyone doing this, the elected officials, the staffers, the reporters, the voters, we're all just normal, real people, and you've got to humanize that at some level for this to really matter. We try to represent any constituency you can come up with within various factions within the majority party to various factions with the Democratic Party to libertarians and independents. We have a little bit of everything on Peach Pundit. Our folks have to really be interested in this because if you notice our site, there's no advertising revenue. We have an all-volunteer staff, including the guys that run the IT in the background, myself as the editor. We all just basically have some interest in politics, and the time we're able to spend on Peach Pundit is frankly all of our spare time. I started as a commenter on Peach Pundit 9 years ago, now end up editing the site. It's something that just, I'm like a frog that was put in the pot of boiling water. We're at a good rolling bowl right now. There are often days where I figure out what are we doing with this, why am I doing this, but I have the time. It is something I've always been interested in. I'm a frustrated policy wonk by nature. You know, frankly, it's fun. If it wasn't fun, we'd quit doing it.
According to public disclosures, gift travel paid by outside organizations to members of Congress is often packed with visits to vital services like health centers and environmental efforts. But in other cases, not as much. Savannah has always been a very pat each other on the back, television market, government, system. We branded it the Good Government Project for a reason. I like to have conversations with people about issues. And I usually find myself stopping them a minute in and saying, I know you feel very passionately about this, but there are so many systemic problems that we'll never get to fixing this issue or that issue if we don't deal with the influence of money or the influence of lobbying or the influence of, functional changes in legislatures, ethics, whatever it is. I mean, I can be forcefully opinionated about issues of transparency. If there isn't a greater arbiter of transparency than a journalist, then we've got problems. Ethics and transparency may not be a hot button issue, but until we get to some of these systemic problems, we're not going to solve the other ones. I firmly believe that. Something's changed. It's kind of ironic that it wasn't until I gave up my ambition and sort of was able to step back and just do things for the purity of them and kind of take a deep breath and live my life that I've been able to sort of achieve the type of journalism that I've always dreamed of doing, and that I had to actually step back many, many steps in market size and maybe in notoriety or salary or whatever it is that you want to heap on top of that to accomplish the meaningful differences that I think that these stories have made and the ones that I'm still working on.
Common Cause in Georgia is the citizens' lobby and its lobbyists, and it speaks for everyone, and that's terribly important. Common Cause Georgia indeed does hold power accountable. I'm Wyke Orr, a board member here at Common Cause Georgia. You may have heard that our slogan at Common Cause Georgia is holding power accountable, and that's what we do. We work hard to hold government officials and politicians accountable to the people of this great state. Let's take a look at our program of work in that direction over the past year, because we hope that if you're not a member of our organization, that you will become one, and that if you are an existing member, that you will redouble your efforts to help us in achieving our goals.
Next is Mr. Wyke Orr. Despite his Auburn education, he is a quite studious gentleman. He's been a trial lawyer for almost 40 years. Mr. Orr represented Hall and Dawson counties and a portion of Gwinnett in the Georgia House of Representatives from 1989 to 1993, interestingly enough, when the Georgia Dome was being debated and discussed and voted on in the Georgia legislature.
Well, on behalf of Common Cause Georgia, let me again thank all of you for being here, because without an involved and active citizenry, then we simply don't have the kind of questions put forward and the kind of input that's needed from people who will be most affected by this. So Common Cause Georgia very much appreciates your involvement. And I think we would just reiterate our call that the negotiations be opened up in a way which will allow public representatives and the press to be more present and more involved as negotiations progress on a day-to-day basis. And we would hope that there would be an opportunity when a deal has been arrived at, but before it is etched in stone, before it's final, for as many of those details as possible to be revealed to the public, and for there to be a public comment period where all manner of people can see what is going to be done before it's done, and can have the opportunity for input, for questioning. You know, I told amusement during an interview today that it reminds me of something Ralph Waldo Emerson said. He said, you know, all too often people question the masses. Someone questions the masses. What do the masses know? Well, Emerson had great faith in the masses, as he said, had great faith in the common sense of the public to see things that those directly involved in negotiation may not recognize as far as impact on the community, impact on the people who live and work in close proximity to what's going to happen there. So we call for that to be greater, publicized and divulged so there can be more comment before anything is final, and for a cooling off period where the public can see exactly what's going to transpire before it does. So there's an opportunity for meaningful public input. Thank you.
Won't you help us make an even bigger difference today and tomorrow? Please support Common Cause Georgia.